Alright, different setup as you can see. This is my childhood bedroom because self-isolation has forced me to move out of my dorm and back into my parents' house, which sucks. I don't like not having independence. I don't like being back living in my childhood room, but that's what's happening right now. I think that's what's happening to a lot of people, so I'm just gonna skip past it, but that's where I am, that's what's going on. Moving on. So I actually have a topic for today, which is great. I wanted to recommend some movies for people. And I was thinking, like, what movies from the last year did my friends really like? What, you know, might some of the people who watch this in general have been interested in? And I was like, well, all my friends really liked Little Women. I'm gonna recommend movies that are similar to Little Women, not quite the same, but are all film adaptations in some shape or form. Or at least are like related to the literary canon. And that I think are like similar in tone, or at least interesting enough to hold your attention. I'm gonna divide these into two categories. It'll make sense. So the first category are films that are like direct adaptations of books that I think people who like Little Women would also be interested in. They are period pieces, so there's that. And then the second category is about literature, but they're like kind of biopics about the people who wrote the books. Those films are also a lot weirder, so I'm gonna save them for last because I think there's a higher chance you're gonna like the films in the first category than the second category. I just like the films in the second category and I figured I'd throw them in here because they're good. So the first film, and this is I think probably a pretty obvious one, the 2005 Pride and Prejudice with Keira Knightley. It is a gorgeous film. I think one of the things I liked the most about Little Women was how like lush it was in a way. Like the colors were so rich and I liked how you kind of flowed through the space with them, and Pride and Prejudice kind of has that similar quality. It is obviously a period piece. It's a Jane Austen novel. Personally, I think if you like Little Women, you probably also would like Jane Austen. Jane Austen's a bit more like clever and focuses more on like interpersonal relationships. If you like the relationship between like Amy and Joe, I think there's a lot in Pride and Prejudice that could hold your attention. So yeah, that's the first recommendation. I think Pride and Prejudice 2005 is the best Pride and Prejudice. Some people would disagree with me on that. I know a lot of people really like the BBC version, which is fine. I just really like Keira Knightley, so that's the one. Second film, which is in a very similar vein, is Jane Eyre, the 2011 one, with Mia, her last name, Wasikowska? I'm gonna say Wasikowska, and we're gonna roll with that. I really like this movie. I've seen it like 4 or 5 times. I like Jane Eyre a lot. It's a much more like dreary novel than Little Women, but once again, if you like period pieces, it's a very straightforward, good, romantic period piece. It has Christian Bale in it. He's hot, so there's that. Little Women has such a setting to it, which is like rural Massachusetts. Jane Eyre also has a very distinct setting, which is like the moors of England. And I think there's still like those rolling hills and those very like green spaces. It's like a calming film, because Jane Eyre isn't necessarily, it's a mystery, and I think people associate mysteries with being like kind of on the edge of your seat, but I actually find the film to be really calming, especially like in this time that we're going through. I think a nice calming period piece has some value, so yeah, Jane Eyre. My last one in this category is Maurice. It's from the late 80s. It has Hugh Grant in it. And I'm trying to remember who the other guy is. Hold on. Sorry. No. James Wilby is the other guy. And I'm looking at his filmography now, and there's a reason I didn't really remember him, which is fine. It's actually very similar to Call Me By Your Name. It was written by, like the screenplay was written by the same guy who did Call Me By Your Name. Obviously 2 completely separate books. It is an adaptation of a novel from the 70s, I believe. But it's a gay romance taking place in like the early 20th century in England. So it's not quite the same period as the other films, but it's still like a period piece. It is still a romance, and Little Women has a lot of romance in it, and I know that's the appeal that a lot of people have for that film. And I know specifically that people, okay, so Little Women also has like Timothée Chalamet in it. So this is kind of like a dual recommendation. If you like Call Me By Your Name, and that led you to like Little Women because Timothée Chalamet is in it, then check out Maurice, because Call Me By Your Name and Maurice are like part of the same DNA. Like, very much so. It's more or less the same story, just taking place at a different time. You'll see what I mean if you watch it, but yeah, it's very similar. There's like some shots even that seem like Call Me By Your Name pulled them out of Maurice. And Maurice doesn't get a lot of attention. Like, I haven't seen anybody ever mention they've seen it, but it's a great film. Definitely like in my top 50 films of all time. So, and Hugh Grant is great in it. I think it's one of his first performances, so if you're a Hugh Grant fan too, go for it. So moving on to the last category. This one's kind of a shot in the dark. Just some things that I like that I think there's a chance, if you liked Little Women, that you would like these other films. They're both a lot quirkier. I would say they both kind of veer into comedy. One is a horror film, but bear with me. So the first one is Gothic. It's from 1986, directed by Ken Russell. It's about, so if you remember like high school literature class, you'll remember the backstory of Frankenstein is that Mary Shelley was having a party with all her friends, and they were all telling scary stories, and that's the one she came up with. Gothic is about that night. So if you like literature, if the reason you like Little Women is because you like literature, I think there's a good chance that you also like Mary Shelley. And this is, if you like Mary Shelley, like this is a film to watch. Like, I would not recommend skipping it. It has 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. A lot of people think it's bad. It is like 80s cheesy, silly, but in like the best way, like in the best like Britishy, silly, funny, goofy way. I personally have like a huge soft spot for that. Not everybody does, but it's a good laugh. It does have some like genuinely like scary scenes. The performances are great, like absolutely fantastic. Yeah, Natasha Richardson is Mary Shelley. She does a great job. Yeah, Byron is there. Percy Shelley is there. It's great. It's a really good time. I watched it with my boyfriend a couple months ago, and we were both like absolutely blown away by it. And I think if you're a literature fan at all and you like Victorian era horror, if you like Victorian era literature, if you like Frankenstein, yeah, it's honestly, I think it's a must watch. So, Gothic, great film. All right, and my last one, also kind of a controversial pick, is Shakespeare in Love, the Best Picture winner from 2001, I think. Also is kind of tainted now because it's very closely related to Harvey Weinstein, but he didn't obviously direct it, he funded it, so I don't have a huge issue with still watching it, especially because it's one of my favorite films. I think it's delightful, it's really funny. Once again, I'm just connecting Little Women to liking literature in general. So if you like literature, obviously you've read Shakespeare, I would have to assume. Even though it's their plays, they have a huge effect on pretty much all of the written word that follows. It's not like super factually accurate, but it does have a lot of good goofs and gags that are related to Shakespeare. It's a nice interpretation of Shakespeare, I think. A really charming one. That like still has a lot of respect for the work even when it's kind of goofing on, you know, different Shakespeare tropes and like goofing on Shakespeare in general, like as a person. Yeah, also the lead is a woman. All of these films except for Maurice have a lead female character, by the way. She falls in love with Shakespeare, that's why it's called Shakespeare in Love, obviously. So once again, romance, except it's also kind of funny, and I think, because Little Women like has really, I think, charming, funny moments. Not necessarily in the same like slapsticky way that Shakespeare in Love does, but compared to previous Little Women installations, I think the newest one has, like, there's like that scene where like Amy's like making a cast of her foot that I can see a lot of my friends doing, honestly. Even though like maybe nobody's making a cast of their foot anymore, like it's just, it feels fresh. And and it's hard to keep period pieces fresh. So I really commend Shakespeare in Love for feeling fresh, even now, like 20 years down the line, while engaging deeply with literature of like the 1500s. Those are my 5 films that I would recommend if you like Little Women. Like I said, the last 2 films are deeper cuts that aren't necessarily as related. I just like them. They're good period pieces. But the first 3 I definitely would recommend. Yeah, I think I'll link down below like where you can stream all these. They're all available on streaming. And yeah, I hope everybody's doing okay. I hope this made sense. I'm like really scattered today, honestly. If you have any other movies that you think people who like Little Women would like, then leave them below in the comments or message me if you think that there's something I should watch that maybe I haven't watched. Not that you know everything that I've watched, but follow me on Letterboxd and you can see. I'll link that below as well. Alright, that's it. Stay safe out there. Don't leave your house unless you're going to the grocery store. And even then, be really careful. Alright, bye.